It is hard to imagine a more picturesque backdrop for a hiking adventure than the frosted summits of the Ural Mountains against a crisp blue sky. Add a couple of feet of newly fallen snow to the mix, and the idyllic setting is complete. But the real beauty of this part of northern Russia lies in its rim, because out here, the only people you'll meet are animals. There are no roads leading to the peaks and passes of the Urals. It's almost perfectly wild. In the winter of 1959, 9 young hikers decided to take advantage of this untamed wilderness. But what happened to them on the slopes of Mount Otorten will forever remain one of the greatest mysteries of the region. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Our story starts with the group's leader, 23-year-old Igor. He was an engineering student at the University of Ural, and also a seasoned outdoorsman, having climbed several of the lesser peaks in the Urals. The members of his team were all similarly experienced. In fact, most of them had summited Otorten before, so no one was particularly concerned about their safety. After all, they planned to be back in civilization within a couple of days. The hike itself began on January, when the students left the town of Yekaterinburg in search of adventure. Over the next 2 days, they made their way north toward their final destination, taking shelter in caves and abandoned mines. The conditions were difficult but not dangerous. On January, they arrived at the forest clearing where the slopes of Kolatsayakal rose before them, and there they pitched their tent and prepared to wait out the bad weather. This was the spot that local Mansi people referred to as the Mountain of the Dead. The ominous name didn't faze the young hikers, and besides, they didn't intend to stay there long. They would only need to rest for a few days until the snowstorm passed and the trail became safer. Then they could continue on to Otorten and complete their mission. Except for the storm that never came, the hikers were trapped inside their tent for days, subsisting on their food supply and sleeping in shifts, so that someone was always awake to watch the weather. When the skies finally cleared on February, they unzipped the tent and emerged into a world of sparkling white. Their spirits lifted immediately. The sun glistened off the snow, the wind was calmer. It was time to strike camp and get to work. And then they discovered something disturbing. Most of their ropes were severed. Somehow, during the night, the ropes holding up their tent had been cut, although the canvas itself was undamaged. Perhaps it had been animals, they thought, or simply the stress of the wind. Whatever the reason, they had a decision to make: stay put and wait for warmer weather or press on ahead. The group voted to continue and headed off toward a pass, which led to the final climb of it. But less than an hour later, they did something completely out of character. They turned around and headed back to the tent. The group was now moving down the mountain, and the next thing we know, their tent lay abandoned and ripped open on the side of the mountain, as if from the inside. Yet there was no sign of a struggle and no indication of where the hikers might have gone. The equipment was mostly intact. Their food supplies remained untouched. There was no obvious reason for them to leave the tent. The weather was fine. They had plenty to eat, and there was nothing to indicate that they were in any danger. On the morning of February, their worried families filed a missing persons report, prompting a large-scale search effort that lasted for months. The first clue to the tragedy didn't surface until May, when 2 hikers found the tent and sent word to the authorities. A team of 30 rescuers set out immediately, and that's when they discovered the first body. What rescuers found wasn't just tragic, it was terrifying. The 2 hikers were lying dead at the foot of a pine tree, partially hidden beneath a mound of earth. Both were missing their boots and socks, and their clothes were ripped and scattered around them. But the most disturbing detail was that both were their shirts and trousers were pulled up to their knees and waist respectively. One of the dead had even removed his underwear, with both victims seemingly fully aware of their surroundings, minus their footwear, their gloves, and hats. Their outer layers of clothing. They hadn't tried to flee from the freezing temperatures. Why would they have shed themselves of their jackets, shoes and socks, and exposed themselves to such high risk? And what happened to their tongues? The pair had died with their mouths wide open, their teeth bare, but the lack of flesh around those teeth told a gruesome tale of cannibalism. This morbid discovery prompted the search party to return to the tent, where they found traces of blood, suggesting that the hikers had carried their wounded companions from the tent to the tree line. However, the mystery deepened with each new discovery. For example, footprints in the snow outside the tent suggested that some members of the group had fled without their boots, while others had ventured out wearing their heavy ski boots. And those footprints led straight into the trees and vanished. The tent's rips were consistent with the snow collapsing onto the canvas, rather than being torn from the inside. Why had the hikers fled? Were they chased, or were they running from something that terrified them more than the bitter cold? And where did they go? They disappeared without a trace. The investigation into the Dyatlov case went on for months, and it wasn't until April that the remaining 7 bodies were located. 4 were found close to the pine tree, squeezed together between the trunk and a nearby rock. 1 was lying face down in the snow. Another was found half submerged in a stream, and the last was sprawled across a nearby hill. The group had been discovered within a radius of less than a square mile, as if they had been brought there intentionally. Yet, each of their bodies told a different story. Some exhibited injuries consistent with an intense physical struggle, such as the fractured skull and crushed chest of Nikolai Thibault, who was also found without his eyes. Others showed no signs of injury except for missing body parts. Semyon Zolotaryov was found without his tongue. Yuri Krivonishenko had no eyeballs, and Yuri Doroshenko was missing his genitals. These macabre details revealed a terrifying possibility. Had the hikers been hunted, perhaps by an animal, cannibalized and mutilated? Yet forensic evidence pointed to a more likely scenario. First, the degree of decomposition varied among the bodies, which meant that some of the hikers must have died shortly after leaving the tent, while others perished near the end of February. Second, the rope fractures on the bodies were consistent with snapping under extreme tension, meaning that whatever caused them harm probably weighed between 880 and 2,200 pounds. Finally, the state of their clothing revealed that some had been stripped off, while others had been torn during the struggle. This meant that their tormentors had taken time, even effort, to dismember them. The Dyatlov Pass incident soon became the talk of the nation, and the government hastily assembled a team of experts to determine the cause of death. Initially, they concluded that an avalanche had struck the group, knocking them unconscious and tearing their tent from its roof. An avalanche would explain their disorientation, the resulting hypothermia, and the latest stripping of their body. But it doesn't explain the severity of their injuries, nor the missing body parts. So when a second investigation turned up no evidence of an avalanche, the authorities reverted to the initial assessment. Their final report offered no explanation for the cannibalism or the extent of the hikers' injuries. And that was that. The case was closed. The files were sealed and the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident was largely forgotten. In 1991, the case was reopened amid public outcry. But despite fresh speculation and multiple theories, nothing new came to light. Officially, the incident is still listed as a, quote, compelling natural event. Yet many believe that the truth lies elsewhere. One theory holds that the hikers encountered infrasound, a naturally occurring sound wave of very low frequency. Infrasound can trigger profound changes in human behavior, such as increased feelings of anxiety, fear, and panic, and it has been known to drive some people insane. Might it have overwhelmed the hikers and driven them to abandon their tent, tear at their own clothes, and chomp on one another? Another theory involves the Soviet weapons tests conducted at the nearby Mezgori testing site. Although the timing of this test is uncertain, could the hikers have stumbled upon a radioactive hazard zone and panicked, desperate to escape invisible but deadly particles? Traces of radiation were found on some of their clothing, but it wasn't enough to confirm this theory. These are only 2 of many theories, including reports of strange orange lights seen above the mountains on the night of February, hinting at extraterrestrial visitation. Local witnesses claimed to see unusual figures and formations in the sky, while others alleged that the hikers saw something similar and attempted to escape. Some researchers argue that these mysterious beings may have somehow returned, abducting several hikers and leaving the rest to fend for themselves. Then there's the legend of the Mountain of the Dead itself. Before the incident, local Mansi people spoke of a malevolent entity dwelling in the peak known as Kolat. Could there be truth to their claims? Could the hikers have been lost, dismembered and devoured by a beast unknown to science? The Dyatlov Pass incident continues to baffle experts nearly 60 years on. The truth may never be known, but the haunting details linger still, reminding us that the wilderness holds wonders beyond our understanding. We may never know what drove them mad. We may never know what they screamed about in their final moments. But in the echoing silence of the Urals, their story lives on, a testament to the enduring power of the unknown.